Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a slightly late edition of Scotland at 7 this evening with me, Gordon Ross, in the studio, and my two friends, Chris McCusker. Sorry, Chris, I just noticed you over there. Chris McCusker on my left, or as you're looking at it, on the left, and Dave Tucker sitting on the right-hand side of your screen this evening. We're all as far apart as we can possibly be geographically, so no problem with containing the virus here in the studio tonight. So that brings me straight into the coronavirus news this evening, which is that as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 11,487 Scottish tests concluded. And of these, 10,593 were confirmed negative. 894 tests were positive, and this means an increase of 175 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 25. The latest UK figures available show 463 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 97,019 people have been tested, of which 87,490 were confirmed negative and 9,529 confirmed positive. So I think if I'll come to you first, Dave, for a response to these new figures this afternoon. The increase in numbers continues to rise every day. Sorry, that's a very, very poorly expressed sentence there. But it seems that they're climbing inexorably, and we've been warned, of course, that we are approaching a tipping point where the level of new coronavirus victims is going to rise steeply, and hence these extreme measures that we're all taking at the moment.
Yeah, two to 3 weeks, I think.
Say that again, Dave.
2 to 3 weeks.
I hardly hear you there. I've got a bad line here.
Oh. Right. 2 to 3 weeks. I heard that
it
was going to be the real crunch time.
Yeah, so they're thinking that it's sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks we'll see the number really starting to spike and hitting the high point. I think this is the point at which they're most concerned that the NHS might become overwhelmed.
Yes.
So, Chris, if I might bring you into this, Chris, since you have a finger on the pulse, as it were, with your connection with the SNP. Have you heard anything more from your side of things, Chris, about how the figures are climbing? Are they going up as expected?
Well, yeah, Nicola always says that these are estimates, and although the actual figures themselves, the death rate and the people that are down in viruses, but she always says that these are not set in. The people that are tested are not set in stone. So we're on the upward trajectory, for want of a better word. We can possibly take heart that we are slightly behind London. Obviously, London, England being largely bigger than Scotland, but
yeah. Chris, we're just displaying a chart here which is showing the gradual rise as it gets steeper and steeper, and it's being sort of projected forward in time. The figures are of course based on models which have been produced, but it looks as if very much like it's sticking almost exactly to the prediction. That you can see that these are the actual figures that we're looking at here, right up to today, and you can see that the line at the top of the graph is becoming more and more vertical, showing that the rise in cases is rising exponentially. In other words, it's growing daily at a faster and faster rate. The question is, do we think that the NHS is going to be overwhelmed, or will it be able to withstand this first wave of the virus? Dave, what's your feeling on this? Do you think the NHS is as ready as it can be?
No, it couldn't possibly be because it's been so underfunded and they've been caught on the back foot. And to a degree, we're slightly better up here, but only because we've got a smaller population, and we're doing things very slightly differently. But even up here, they were a bit slow off the mark. And if you listen to the poor woman on JMS this morning, the doctor, who was pulling her hair out because visitors were still being allowed in to see patients in the Queen Elizabeth, and there was nowhere at the entrance door for them to wash hands or anything like that. And I think since her plea, action is being taken, but people have been very complacent. And I know that I've been given a row by my own daughter, who's a scrub nurse, and she said, "Mum, you're not taking this seriously enough." She's heartbroken because she was supposed to be coming home this weekend for a 2-week, helping me out with the lambing. But she's terrified because of my age that she will bring the thing to me. And what she's terrified that if I get bad and I have to go on a ventilator, I'll be taken off when they're needed for younger people. So poor wee soul. I've tried to console her and I've said, no, she's just got to stay where she is, forget the lambing. We will manage.
I hope so, Day. Chris, what's your feeling on this? Are we ready for this first big wave of cases that's coming our way?
Well, I would like to think so, and I think the mindset of all our NHS workers are pretty much, what we've got to deal with today, we will deal with. Whether it's an exponential rise in the figures and all the rest of it. But what I was looking forward to hearing not looking forward to hearing. You can never look forward to anything in this situation apart from the end. But down in London, they've identified somewhere to set up a hospital, makeshift hospital, and it looks like they have earmarked the SECC.
Yeah, I understand that York Hill was spoken about as well, I believe.
Yeah, well, I think that the SECC would be better because it's closer to the. Obviously, it's closer to the Clyde. It's closer to the M8. It's obviously. The M8's closer to the airport, stuff like that.
Handy, it's closer to the hospital.
Landing facilities as well for helicopters. So I think they should start work on that now rather than, we might use the SEC, we might use York Hill, we might use, whatever. Yeah. Let's get on this now and get ahead of the curve before it does actually necessitate that action.
Chris, listen, while we're talking about getting on and getting ahead of the curve, of course, news has just come in today, in fact, this very afternoon, that the UK government has finally come up with an offer for self-employed people to protect their earnings. The self-employed people must wait until June to get 80% of their earnings covered by the state, up to a maximum of £2,500 a month for the first 3 months in response to the coronavirus crisis. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said that the plan would be backdated to March and would cover those earning up to £50,000 a year, or 95% of the self-employed. It was one of the most generous schemes anywhere in the world, I'm quoting there, and ended weeks of uncertainty for those who work for themselves, he said. However, many of those struggling with the impact of coronavirus on their business will have to wait months to get any money and may potentially have to sign up for universal credit in the meantime. The taxable grant will be based on the average monthly profits of the self-employed over 3 years, so people will need to have filed a tax return to be eligible. Speaking at the government's daily press conference, Sunak said the government will pay self-employed people who have been adversely affected by the coronavirus a taxable grant worth 80% of their average monthly profits over the last 3 years, up to £2,500 a month. The grant is equivalent to the help offered for salaried workers after Boris Johnson had said there would be parity. Sunak said that it would be available to those who make the majority of their income from self-employment, so only the genuinely self-employed would benefit. And to minimise fraud for only those who are already in self-employment who have a tax return for 2019 will be able to apply, he said. 95% of people who are majority self-employed will benefit from this scheme. HMRC are working on this urgently and expect people to be able to access the scheme no later than the beginning of June. Now, in response to this, Ian Blackford has criticised the Chancellor's plans for the self-employed across the UK, warning that delayed measures simply do not go far enough for millions in urgent need of support. Mr Blackford added that the proposals outlined by Rishi Sunak today fail to match the Prime Minister's pledge at PMQs to deliver parity with the support announced earlier for employees, with the new income support scheme scheduled to be up and running by June. The Resolution Foundation estimates that 1 in 3 people in self-employment, or a total of 1.7 million people, are at risk from losing their income, including around 330,000 in Scotland. The SNP Westminster leader has renewed his calls on the UK government to introduce emergency universal basic income to protect people's incomes in the face of the pandemic and to prevent people from being pushed into debt and hardship. Now, we have just got some news just coming in. It's just been handed to me here. This is the response to the Chancellor's announcement of support for the self-employed, and this is coming. This is the Scottish Government's response to Rishi Sunak's announcement today. Responding to the announcement by the UK Government of support for self-employed people, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Kate Forbes, said, along with a range of organisations and hundreds of thousands of self-employed people across Scotland, we have been calling on the UK Government to introduce a package of measures for self-employed, similar to the support they announced for employees. Along with a range of organisations and hundreds of thousands of self-employed people across Scotland. Sorry, I beg your pardon, I'll read that again. I'm pleased to see this announcement today, and I recognise the difficulties of administering the system, but I have serious concerns about how long people will have to wait for this much-needed support. Many self-employed people are on low incomes with bills to pay and families to feed, and they can't afford to wait until June for this vital support. More urgency is required, whether through speeding up payments or the benefits system. So there we have a very rapid response from the Scottish Government today, saying that this is a rather slow response from the UK Government. Let me first turn to you, Chris, on this one, because this is a Scottish Government response to Rishi Sunak's announcement today. My reading of this, Chris, tells me that it's been nuanced a little bit. They're trying to shut out people who make part of their income from being salaried and part of it from self-employment. They don't seem to be getting anything. This is only for those, the majority of whose work comes from self-employment. What do you think? Is he trying to wriggle out of some of the payments?
Well, Rishi Sunak actually said that he wanted, again, going along with Boris Johnson's mantra of parity, that he was keen that the more affluent self-employed do not adversely get an added benefit that they actually do not need. But then similarly, I think he's not done enough. Not done enough for the ordinary self-employed person who struggles to make.
Chris, do you not think, Chris, that
a year?
Chris, of course, people who are self-employed make a whole variety of different levels of income from that self-employment, many of whom live below the level for the threshold of taxation. And 80% of what they've earned is obviously a lot less than 80% of somebody who's earned £95,000 a year or £50,000 a year. So as usual, it's nearly always in these cases the poorest people who seem to be the most disadvantaged.
Well, you know,
Instead of putting a base level in, they've basically made it as low as possible.
well, I think the answer is actually in the answer that you gave me. You know, because it is the Tories we're dealing with,
Of course.
and you know, they're not known for their frivolity and scattering the cash. You know, especially not where it's needed. So the other thing about Richie Sunak's offer is that whilst he was saying that you know people can access 80% and what have you, the caveats on that was that he said, yeah, you know, they can apply for universal credit right away. But we're still waiting 5 weeks for universal credit to be actually calculated and given out. And along with that, they reiterated the fact that loans on your universal credit payment will be available within.
Chris, if I can interrupt you for a moment, of course, they're going to make people wait until June as well before they can apply for this. So that they're going to have people who are struggling, first of all, to get the benefits that they need, and that's going to cause them to wait 5 weeks. And then after that, they've then got to wait another period of time until June. Day, I think you of all people probably know what it's like living out in the countryside on your own, and you have to rely on what you can make for yourself. And if you haven't got that income, there's nowhere really to turn, is there?
No, that's true. What you have to remember is that every farmer is different. They all have forms of income, but on the whole, their income really comes in once a year, which is in the autumn.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Dave.
Which is in the autumn. So as we have this thing where farmers are so jealous of people who get incomes weekly, monthly, or whatever. On a farm, cash flow is not the norm.
Yeah. So do you find you have to put money away constantly for times when there are pauses in production or pauses between getting payments?
Absolutely. And although they do get the support from the EU, that support money flies out the pockets very quickly for feed for livestock, for running the vehicles to make the harvest and all that sort of thing. A lot of people think, oh, farmers are rich because they fly about in big four-wheel drive vehicles. What you'll find is that the majority of those vehicles are on hire purchase.
One of the other things, Dave, that people have brought up since this came out is if your business makes a tax loss, if your business makes a loss, then you can't claim this benefit, this money, because it is money that is only coming to you that's equivalent of 80% of your profits. So if you don't make a profit from 1 year, then it's likely that you're not going to get anything at all.
Yes. Yes.
Even though you might make enough money to keep yourself afloat, but you might not have made enough money, you know? I mean, if you, for example, invested in a new tractor, you could be several years without a clear profit.
Well, it's well known that the level of debt in farming is absolutely shocking. Yeah. It's massive.
Well, listen, I'm going to move us on to the next story because we started a little late this evening, and this is still along the same lines of the story of the coronavirus, and this one is about keeping healthcare workers safe. Action has been taken to bring an additional 1.5 million protective respirators into use from NHS Scotland's central stockpile. The tightly fitting face masks, which provide a high level of protection for staff working with coronavirus patients, were not previously used because they had recently passed their expiry date. However, scientific evidence from a stringent independent series of tests has shown that the FFP respirators continued to be safe to use. Both the Health and Safety Executive and Health Protection Scotland have reviewed the evidence and are satisfied that the stocks are safe for use by NHS staff. Dr. Catherine Calderwood, Scotland's Chief Medical Officer, said, "The safety of our health and social care staff is our utmost priority, and it's essential that they have the right equipment to keep them safe as they go about their work." While there is currently an adequate supply of respirators, we know that there is significant pressure on global supplies of personal protective equipment due to the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak. We've therefore decided to test this recently expired stock to determine whether it still provides an adequate level of safety and protection. Those tests have shown that the equipment continues to meet those standards, and therefore we will bring these masks into use to ensure that we continue to have adequate stocks as the outbreak develops. Dr. Miles Mack, the chair of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges and Faculties in Scotland, has said, effective personal protective equipment is essential, and we understand the difficulties around sourcing that have been encountered. On the basis of Health Protection Scotland agreement, we have no issue with this stock of masks being distributed for the use of the NHS at this time. Chris, if I might come to you for a response to this one. I know that as a union rep, sometimes health and safety can be part of your remit. And if you were a union rep at the moment who is working representing NHS members, how would you respond to this?
You'd be pulling your hair out, to be honest with you, Gordon, because your members are asking you as the rep. You are the go-between, and you have to make representations on their behalf to management, and the rules and regulations are enshrined in the Health and Safety at Work Act. And whilst the management are, obviously given every assurance that the correct PPE is trying to be sourced and put out in circulation, pretty much as soon as possible. It won't stop people from asking where is their PPE, because when you get taken on as a job, then if you're an office worker, you get supplied a desk, you get supplied a telephone, you get supplied a laptop. So therefore, if you're a hospital worker, you should be supplied the correct PPE that goes along with that job description.
That is part of,
you're a porter, or whether you're, working in theatre or working on the ward.
Well, like you, Chris, I'm a former union man. I was a health and safety rep for many years, and the Health and Safety at Work Act would come into play with this, and so any personal protective equipment has to be suitable for the purpose it's provided for, doesn't it? But it's better to have something that's slightly out of date but still effective, eh?
Yeah.
Well, as long as they've been retested and someone has signed on the dotted line to say that these are adequate.
Well, they've been tested.
That's fine. Because if there's a signature there, if something happens, you can then trace it back to that signature and say, well, you were the one that signed them off and said they were okay. So,
well, Day, I'm sorry, I cut across you earlier on. Day, you were wanting to make a comment.
Yes, and Chris makes very good points about this, the person signing it off. But sometimes, there's a cost benefit to things, and you have to weigh up the cost against the benefit. But to go back to why I interrupted, it begs the question: if these have now been deemed safe, why were they ever deemed not safe? And is this
the manufacturers? They put a shelf life on them. They have an expiry date, which it's usually short, quite a long way short of the time at which they would no longer be useful. the rubber might start to perish or the elastic might start to stretch. But these masks have obviously been tested to make sure that they don't leak and that the filter sections of the mask are still effective. So they will have gone through the same rigorous testing that they would have done at the beginning before they were procured, before they can be handed out. I'm certain of it. Alex, I hope that it's true, but I would be fairly certain that they wouldn't risk this. Listen, I'd like to move the show on a little bit further now, talking about money again and the effect of the coronavirus on people's incomes. That more than 500,000 people have now applied for universal credit. Workers attempting to apply for universal credit after being laid off during the coronavirus crisis have described how it's almost impossible to complete a claim. More than 500,000 people have applied for the vital payments in the last 9 days, the Department of Work and Pensions revealed on Wednesday. However, benefits experts have warned that only a fraction of them will have succeeded because the service is swamped and it is currently almost impossible to talk to anybody at the Department of Work and Pensions. First-time claimants have described calling the service between 80 and 100 times to no avail. The Guardian has been trying over the last 2 days and has been unable to get through. At one stage yesterday, there were queues of 145,000 people waiting to log onto the website where all claims must start. All those making a first application for universal credit would usually attend a meeting at their local job centre. However, since the COVID-19 crisis began, applicants have had to call an 0800 number to make a phone appointment. But it is impossible, say the applicants. Claimants already faced 5-week waits for payments to be processed in normal times. The fear is that the system will be swamped unless the rules are changed. Many are coming up against the problem that those with savings of more than £16,000 are not entitled to universal credit. Anna Stevenson, a welfare and benefits expert at the financial charity Turn to Us, said that claimants had been contacting the charity to report the problem, fearful that this will hold up payments that they're due. She said the lack of call handlers is particularly affecting those applying for employment and support allowance and those with a disability or health condition which rely on a phone call. Universal credit claimants have to make this appointment within 30 days of them completing their applications, and for the claim to be approved, the interview must happen. People have been contacting us to ask what is going on as they are finding it impossible to get through, she said. The Department for Work and Pensions said today that claimants could ask for an appointment by going back online and adding a note in their journal. On Wednesday, the DWP's top civil servant, Peter Schofield, told MPs that processing universal credit claims had become the department's main focus. He said that the department had so far redeployed 1,500 members of staff to help with universal credit claims, and that the aim was to increase this to 3,900 by the end of the week. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is due to give more details of support for the country's 5 million self-employed people later today, which may halt the rise in claims. So the whole thing seems to have literally come to a grinding halt. Chris, if I might come to you first of all, surely a government, a national government, which is asking people, millions of people, to sign on for effectively what we used to call dole money, would have anticipated the fact that the system, which is designed for several thousand people applying, couldn't possibly cope with several million or hundreds of thousands of people all applying at once.
Well, quite clearly no, because we have been telling the Tories and UK Labour as well that the current benefit system is not fit for purpose in the UK, and the successful migration of so-called legacy benefits into universal credit, has just spiraled people into, abject misery more than anything, because whilst they have migrated on, because of that migration, they've actually lost money.
Yeah.
So these, and this adds weight to what the SNP have been calling for, which is a universal payment.
Yeah.
In order to get everybody through this crisis, and then obviously have a look at revamping the whole system
Yeah.
once again. I mean, obviously, this wouldn't be pertinent to
Do you
Scotland
not,
if we
Chris,
were
do you not think,
in control of our whole benefit system, of course.
Chris, do you not think that what Mr. Blackford was saying today is in fact the most obvious answer? If they brought in a basic living wage, basic income for everyone who's affected by the coronavirus, then this could all be got around by simply placing money in people's accounts electronically and not having to force them to have to jump through all of these hoops and get through all this triaging. I mean, to me, it looks like, it'd be like trying to get 90,000 football fans out of a stadium through one door. It's not possible.
Yeah. Well, the other thing as well that Ian Blackford pointed out was the fact that some of the Nordic countries have adopted it and put it in place fairly quickly. And so the model is there, and quite clearly it's just down to the willingness of the UK government to adopt that model. Now, I would urge the UK government to adopt that model fairly quickish until we get through this crisis, and then we can have a look at the benefit system within the whole of the UK, which is, draconian to say the least. To say the least.
Okay, Dave, if I can bring you into this particular conversation, if there was a universal basic income, do you think this would be a particularly useful move for people living in the countryside and rural areas?
Oh, absolutely. It's so full of common sense. And that's why the Tories aren't doing it, because they're a centralist party and they want to keep this centralist ideology that they have. I can remember being at a meeting with Scottish Land and Estates where the commissioner, the agricultural commissioner's PA, was talking to us, and we asked him what they thought about Scotland, and he said, well, I have to tell you, you're just a region, you're not regarded as a country. And there was an audible sucking in of breath from all the people in the room. And then he said he could see that he'd caused distress. And then he said, but what I will tell you is that the UK is regarded as the most centralist state in the EU, and it is also regarded as the most undemocratic. And I think this is of that.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to cut across the end of your comment there. What I was just going to say was that Mervyn King, the former Director General of the Bank of England, was quoted yesterday, and I think it was the New York Times, and he was saying that he felt that Rishi Sunak should stop worrying about public sector borrowing and simply put money into the accounts of every single worker in the UK until the crisis is over. And this is coming from a man who ran the Bank of England. I mean, Chris, what do you think? Is it just because Mervyn King's no longer in the hot seat you can say this? Or does he really think that there's a chance that could work?
No, I think that obviously Mervyn King knows what he's talking about. He didn't rise to the dizzy heights of the Bank of England without, knowing his onions. So if he reckons that the four nations of the UK can soak up that hit for 6 to 9 months, then it's a suggestion that should be seriously looked at.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems to be that this is partly running up against the Tory ideology, where they don't believe anybody should get something for nothing, although it's all right for the rich to get something for nothing.
They eloquently put it that Tories are a centralist party. They don't believe in throwing money about. I mean, it was only 3 years ago that Theresa May told a nurse that there was no magic money tree,
Yeah.
and yet all of a
And
sudden, where's all this money coming from? It's not coming from 10 years of austerity that was hidden down behind the back of the sofa. The money is there. It
yeah.
is printable.
No, the money is.
Even the bank has said that they would actually buy some of the debt off of the government in order to free up and print some more money. So
of course,
the
Chris,
money is there.
the
It's
bank.
the willingness not to spend it that's not there.
Yeah, of course, Chris. The Bank of England is a currency issuing business anyway. I mean, it is a lending bank, but it's a bank of last resort, and
Yeah.
it can print as much money as is needed for the government. Without the government needing to buy up anything, or without the Bank of England needing to buy up anything. And I think this is sometimes forgotten. Anyway, this actually leads me quite neatly into our next story this evening, which is that the UK government really must act to stop the banks hiking the cost of borrowing. The SNP's Consumer Affairs spokesperson has written to the Chancellor calling on the UK government to step in and act as high street banks raise overdraft charges and lending rates for customers, whilst failing to pass on the interest savings to borrowers. The move comes despite the Bank of England cutting the base rate to a historic low level last week of 0.1% in the wake of the coronavirus crisis, and the governments across the UK introducing a range of measures to ease the financial burden being felt by businesses and individuals. HSBC, First Direct and M&S Bank have all increased unauthorised overdraft charges to 39.9%, with Halifax and Lloyds due to lift rates to the same figure next month. Nationwide and NatWest already charge 39.9% and 39.5% respectively. In commenting, Patricia Gibson MP said, "At a time of national crisis and when millions of people are seeing their jobs and livelihoods put at risk and cash flows disrupted, it's shameful that the banks have chosen to increase the cost of borrowing. I've written to the UK Chancellor and the Financial Conduct Authority urging them to step in and to act to stop banks from exploiting the current situation. The Bank of England base rate cut from 0.5% to 0.1% would save borrowers £600 a year or on a £150,000 mortgage. Rather than pass these savings on to customers, the banks have chosen to plunge millions of customers into further financial difficulty by hiking overdraft charges, personal loans and credit card charges. Many of my constituents and people across the UK are seeing their livelihoods threatened as they're unable to work due to the current crisis. Indeed, charities have seen a huge rise in the number of people struggling with debt in the past week alone. Additional charges will only exacerbate the hardship being felt by many. And this is an unprecedented crisis, and the UK government must take whatever action is necessary to protect the jobs and the livelihoods and to stop the profiteering by high street banks." So in the middle of this massive crisis, the word unprecedented has certainly been used an unprecedented number of times this week. In the middle of this crisis, the British banks choose this exact moment to start charging their customers more than ever before for their overdrafts and loans. So, Dane, let me talk to you first. As a farmer yourself, I know farmers depend quite a lot sometimes on loans from the banks in order to get through the thin patches of the year sometimes, or to buy equipment. How would this affect you?
Not me, because having not received single farm payment up until about 2016, we had to make the business as profitable as possible without any loans at all. So I'm loan free. I'm a very privileged person in that I'm the age I am, so I've got a state pension, and I've got savings, and we're all right. But a lot of the other farmers,
yeah. So,
a lot of the other farmers are.
You're implying there, Dave, that a lot of other farmers are not in the same situation as yourself.
No, it's and I understand why they're like that. Although when I was having to compete against them, when they were getting all these payments, it used to really boil my blood.
Yeah.
but it's put me and all the other young farmers, I have to say, who are in the same situation. They didn't get payments either, but we are much stronger businesses for that.
Yeah. Chris, can I bring you into this? I know that you will have a strong opinion about this one. The banks exploiting the crisis to drive up the rates of the interest rates on their loans. What do you think, Chris?
I think the banks are just acting as unscrupulously as these corner shops that are profiteering out of other people's misery, and you know that you can't dress it up any more than that. You know, at a time of national crisis, banks should be there to help you out. But you know, over the last 30 years, banks have become so impersonal that you know the old adage of computer says no. That there is no empathy in banking anymore. Back in the day, you used to be able to make an appointment, approach your bank manager, sit down and plead your case. 9 times out of 10, that bank manager knew you, maybe drank in the same pub as you, or you know, you would pass him in the street and he would say hello to you. So it was all down to having a good personal relationship with your bank manager.
Indeed.
But the other point that I wanted to make, which Dale will probably understand this, Patricia Gibson's constituency is very, very rural. It has quite a lot of farms, livestock holdings, you know, all throughout the Ayrshire coast. And, you know, I mean, she's quite right to highlight this because at the end of the day, it will impact on, you know, not just the farming industry as well. Patricia's constituency also takes in some coastal area as well, down Arran and stuff like that. You know, so there's fishermen there as well.
Yeah.
You know, and it has to get nipped in the bud, because if it's not nipped in the bud, as we've seen by right-wing capitalists, they will continue to exploit the common man. And, you know, as long as they're not held to account, they will keep on doing it and get away with it.
Well, the talk of exploiting people, Chris, leads us very neatly to the next section of our show this evening, and that is there's been a warning over the coronavirus and its impact on child poverty levels. The child poverty rate could be exacerbated by the coronavirus crisis, the Scottish Greens have warned today. New child poverty figures out show that 24% of children in Scotland in the 2016 to 2019 period experienced relative child poverty equivalent to 230,000 children, with unprecedented numbers of people applying for universal credit as businesses across the country are closed and self-employed contracts are cancelled. The Scottish Greens children and young people spokesman Alison Johnson said emergency measures should protect more children from falling into poverty. Commenting, Alison Johnson said, "I welcome the measures to protect the incomes during this crisis that are coming from the UK and the Scottish governments. But the latest child poverty figures show a real need to ensure more children don't fall below the poverty line. These figures represent the extent of child poverty up until last April, and the severe economic impact of COVID-19 will mean that even more families now will be struggling. And that's why we need to make support easy to access and available to everyone who needs it. We need to ensure that families, all families affected, are encouraged to apply for the Scottish and UK benefits that are due to them, and due to the for the emergency support schemes that are in place. This crisis has shown how vulnerable so many families are in Scotland and made the case for guaranteed basic income that would provide a real safety net." So again, we're hearing from a different party this time the same theme, that a guaranteed basic income could help solve the problem of child poverty as well as helping businesses and self-employed people. Day, I know that your family is probably all grown up now, but you must, I guess, remember what it was like to have young children and to try feeding them on a low wage.
Yeah. Yes, I do, and there's always a wee battle from one week to the next.
Yeah.
But this universal basic income, it's just so much common sense. But somebody said to me today, and when I said, "Why aren't the government doing it? It's simple, it's straightforward. Why aren't they doing it?" And he said, because he thinks it's because if they do that, it would actually be a higher amount than, is it the basic wage? And they don't want to set a precedent.
Yeah,
Well,
they have tried universal basic income out. I think it was in Finland. But what they discovered was that there was no increase in unemployment resulting from it. People didn't deliberately stop working just so that they could get this basic income. It didn't happen that way. Chris, have you any further figures on the idea of using this universal, not universal, but yeah, universal basic income instead of using tax allowances and things like that?
Well, I mean, basically, if it, I go back to what I originally said. I think it was Norway that are successfully doing it at this minute in time. And if it works for them, and Norway being a hell of a lot smaller than Scotland, let alone the UK, you know, it is worth doing a feasibility study at least to see if there is any benefit. The only drawback that I can see is the fact that the Tories are never going to do a feasibility study because we've known the fact that the Tories are quite happy the way that the benefit system is run just now, and they don't want to give anyone else what they would call an unfair advantage. It was only last week that one of the Tory MPs conceded, I think it was on BBC Question Time, that he actually couldn't live on £94.96 per week. But yet he wasn't willing to rectify it or do anything about it or make any representations to the fact that you can't live on £94 a week.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think we could look at. Once we're independent, I know that might be a push further down the line, but it definitely is the way forward for the social equality and social cohesion that gets money circulating around the communities far quicker than what any bank transfer
Chris,
from the government
yeah.
could do 5 weeks down the line.
Chris, I know that we've a lot more to talk about on this subject, but I need to move on. And actually, our next story is another one of these strange ones where it seems like the British Conservative government has allowed sort of dogma or ideology to get in the way of a good idea. And this is a story about the EU's ventilator scheme. Now, the SNP has expressed dismay today that the UK government's refusal to take part in a European Union scheme designed to procure vital ventilator supplies because of its Brexit stance. When asked at Number 10 press briefing this morning why the UK had rejected participating in the scheme, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said, "Well, we are no longer members of the EU." Dr. Philippa Whitford MP, the SNP's shadow Brexit spokesperson, said the coronavirus pandemic does not recognise borders or ideologies, and it's vital that the UK government does not turn its back on collaboration to tackle this virus and to protect our citizens. The UK government has been working well with the devolved governments across the UK, but cooperation with our EU neighbours, particularly in sourcing vital supplies, would be welcomed and engaged with and not shunned. Now, Day, if I can turn to you about this particular story, this was, when I heard it, I was extremely angry about this because I realised that this was another one of those Brexit stories where just because it was the European Union who were proposing this, that somehow Britain shouldn't participate in it. And yet, the scheme, as far as I understand it, would have brought the entire buying power of all 28 states to the market to buy ventilators in huge quantities at vastly lower prices than we would have as a country on our own. And we now hear today that the Tory party is seriously considering asking Charles Dyson, the Hoover man, well, I beg your pardon, the vacuum cleaner billionaire, to come up with a way of turning his mind to producing ventilators when they could have had something like this through Europe.
Yeah, but it would have exposed the folly of Brexit.
It would have what? Say again, Day, I didn't quite hear that.
Right, it would have exposed the folly of Brexit.
Oh, the folly of Brexit, I beg your pardon. There's a slightly bad line there. Yes, so you think it would just have shown up Brexit to be as ridiculous as many people think it is?
Yes.
Chris, what do you think? The British government shunning the chance to buy thousands of ventilators at vastly reduced prices just because of Brexit?
I have to echo exactly what Dave said. That is the epitome of why they've done it. They don't want any more collaboration with the EU because you know they are still quintessentially the Brexit party, and what they don't want to do now, as the four nations have been collaborating quite well together. The last thing they want to do is to diverge from that, you know. So having one of their chums to look into making ventilators is, you know, it sounds like Chris Grayling's a way to talk to one of his mates about, you know, where to find the boats.
Well, it seems
Sorry,
that
it's just after 8 o'clock, Gordon, that's all. It's 8 o'clock, it's a round of applause for all the NHS workers.
Okay, a round of applause for the NHS, everyone. Yep, thank you for that, Chris. Thanks for reminding me.
I just heard it outside the door.
Well, speaking of ideological roadblocks in politics, just caused by people sticking to their ideologies, the next story actually comes from Ireland, from the Republic. The coronavirus crisis has spurred government formation talks in Ireland between Leo Varadkar's ruling Fine Gael party and its old rival Fianna Fáil. Both parties lost seats in a general election last month that marked a revolt against the political establishment, but parliamentary arithmetic and the coronavirus pandemic have prodded them towards an unprecedented coalition. Anything other than team up with Sinn Féin, it seems. Anyway, after weeks of exploratory talks, the two parties issued an agreed statement on Wednesday night that cited the need to form a strong, stable government. Where have we heard that before? To help Ireland recover from the emergency that is set to affect the health of thousands and plunge the economy into a deep recession. They're working to develop a programme for government that provides stability and majority support in the Dáil, the statement said, referring to the Irish Parliament's lower house. A coalition would mean that Varadkar, currently the caretaker Taoiseach, would stay in power and rotate the office with Michael Martin, the leader of Fianna Fáil, during an expected 4 or 5 year term. The two parties would still be short of a majority in the 160-seat chamber, so would need to bring on board independent TDs, the equivalent of our MPs, the Greens, the small left-wing parties, perhaps to form a ruling coalition, a courtship that could last weeks. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil centrist rivals have dominated Irish politics for a century and have ruled out a deal with Sinn Féin, which won a quarter of the vote in the 8th of February election, making it the most popular party in a fractured political landscape. On Thursday, the Dáil met for 12 hours to debate emergency legislation on new measures to slow the coronavirus contagion and to cushion workers, the self-employed, renters and companies from economic devastation. Varadkar said the preparations for a no-deal Brexit had left Ireland better prepared for COVID-19, as some of the stark challenges facing the country came into focus on Thursday. Officials are working on establishing temporary morgues to deal with the expected deaths that's emerged. We are still in the preparation phase to deal with the surge when it comes, Elizabeth Canavan, the Assistant Secretary for Social Policy at the Department of the Taoiseach, told a press briefing. The Economic and Social Research Institute, a Dublin-based independent research organisation, said that the economy could contract by more than 7% this year, and unemployment could jump to 18% if restrictions to contain the pandemic in place for 12 weeks before the crisis. Ireland's economy was the EU's stellar performer and on track for 4% growth. The Republic of Ireland has recorded 1,564 cases of COVID-19 infection and 9 deaths. Northern Ireland has reported 241 cases and 10 deaths. In the election, voters punished Varadkar and his party for a housing and healthcare crisis. But in recent weeks, the Taoiseach has won plaudits from across the political spectrum for his handling of the coronavirus. So it seems, Day, as if Mr. Varadkar and Mr. Martin have come out of this smelling of roses. They went into it looking extremely unhappy, and nobody knew what would happen next because neither party was willing to form a coalition with Sinn Féin. And now they've decided to get together and shut Sinn Féin out completely.
So many parallels.
Yeah, I mean, what we're wondering is, will Sinn Féin make a comeback and eventually still end up holding the balance of power?
Yeah. Yes. Interesting.
Well, they would need to have stood more candidates. I think if they had thought they were going to do better, they would have stood more candidates and would probably have come out with an even bigger number of votes than they had. Chris, I know that you, being the political pundit of the three of us here, really will know more about this than myself and Day. How do you see the situation in the Republic developing at the moment?
Yeah, well, I when that result came in Ireland, I said that Mary Lou McDonald must have been pulling her hair out at the fact that she didn't field more candidates because it looked like when the results were coming in, Sinn Féin were on target for a landslide. The other two parties will carry on with their grievance politics in order to keep the Sinn Féin out. Even if that does making strange bedfellows with Fianna Fáil and the Greens and the Independents and all the rest of it, they will do that because they will not want Sinn Féin to have a say in anything.
Yeah, they also don't really want Sinn Féin to look like they could form a government of any kind, do they?
Well, no, of course, because that would be disastrous. Because then people could actually, they could actually see that Sinn Féin have moved to a credible position of being a political party and not a party which is steeped in the history of the past. Of course. I think Leo Varadkar is actually quite scared of Mary Lou McDonald because she is a very astute and eloquent speaker and sometimes quite a passionate speaker.
Would I be right, Chris? In saying that that Sinn Féin largely represents, shall we say, the poor or the lower paid workers in the Republic rather than the middle classes?
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. In some ways, actually, Sinn Féin are more socialist than the Irish Labour cohorts. Who again just are steeped in history and tradition and don't want to move away from that.
Yeah.
So this is another reason why I say that they will continue to have their grievance agenda against the Sinn Féin.
I think this the current crisis, Chris. Sorry to interrupt you, Chris. I think the current crisis has altered politics rather dramatically. We thought Brexit was altering politics, but this virus is altered it still further. I'm going to move on, Chris, now to our next story, which is the US death toll from coronavirus. And the US coronavirus death toll has actually surged past 1,000 on Thursday, and the number of Americans seeking jobless benefits smashed records, somber evidence of the pandemic's human and economic devastation. About half the United States was under stay-at-home orders to try and curb the spread of the virus, with its side effects strangling the economy and unleashing a wave of layoffs. The number of Americans filing claims for unemployment benefits last week soared to a record of nearly 3.28 million. The Labour Department reported, nearly 5 times the previous weekly record of 695,000 during the 1982 recession. The report may understate the problem, as official statistics typically have not included the self-employed or independent contractors. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said the United States may well be in recession. Statistics showed that the services industries, especially bars and restaurants, as well as hotels, were hammered. For the first time in his life, Travis Cumbo, 37, a bartender in St. Augustine in Florida, filed for unemployment. His bar, the Ice Plant, a few blocks from the beach, was closed because of the coronavirus. So we're seeing a great deal of misery across in America at the moment as well, Day. So we always think of America as being one of those places which is almost too big to fail, as they say, too wealthy to fail.
Funnily enough, it's not, but if you think about it, who would have thought that a country could surpass the mess that the UK has found itself in? But America is definitely surpassing the problems of the UK. And it's all down to Trump.
Well, I heard Donald Trump interviewed yesterday, in which he was saying that he hoped that it would all be under control by Easter and that families would be able to go and celebrate the Easter services at church in Easter. I mean, it almost seems like he's entered into some sort of delusional state over this.
He really. I'm just gobsmacked at how people can still back him.
Yeah. Chris, if I could come to you for a comment. I know that Donald Trump's one of your favourite people to talk about. He seems to be, as the saying goes, fiddling while Rome burns, doesn't he?
Yeah. I have stopped taking an interest in Donald Trump because with every ludicrous thing that comes out of his mouth, I either slap my forehead in complete disbelief, or I just break into uncontrollable laughter and think, what an absolute idiot this guy is.
He's exactly the wrong kind of man to have in charge.
Fool. It is only a fool, a complete idiot, somebody who's not in control of the senses that the good Lord gave them, would only come out with a statement like, we'll be over this by Easter and everybody will be able to go to chapel or church or whatever congregation and sing praises to the Lord and celebrate whatever they celebrate in America at Easter time. And then he's turning around in the same breath and saying that we're going to bolster the amount of armed guards at the Canadian border. This guy? What I want to know, what this guy smokes on a regular basis.
Well, he certainly, Chris, if he was around when the good Lord was handing out common sense, he must have been at the back of the queue, eh? Anyway, I'm going to come back now to the SNP now again, because they've been calling on the UK government this week to provide urgent assistance to citizens overseas who are unable to travel home due to the COVID virus crisis. Ian Blackford MP has written to the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab calling for a programme of evacuation flights to help many thousands of people who are stuck abroad in stressful situations. Mr. Blackford also criticised the airlines which are inflating the cost of the few remaining flight routes. In his letter on behalf of the SNP Westminster Group, Mr. Blackford said that MPs are hearing from constituents in dire situations. He said that given the ongoing context and the crisis, it's now necessary and right for the Foreign Office to fully step in and implement a programme of repatriation, and that this can be done by rolling out a programme of evacuation flights using furloughed commercial aircraft and volunteer pilots and crew. Now, in the back of this, Ryanair has also been accused of ripping off passengers over rebooked flights. Ryanair has been accused of ripping off passengers after it was found to be charging £80 more to those rebooking cancelled flights. Meanwhile, rival low-cost carrier Wizz Air is still charging 30 to 40 euros a passenger to rebook on flights to Hungary and Bulgaria, or 60 euros per passenger per flight to cancel, despite the fact that both countries have closed their borders. A Dublin-based Ryanair made much of its offer to allow passengers fee-free changes after it was forced, along with other airlines, to cancel thousands of flights. And while it has waived its change fees, passengers still have to pay the difference if the new fare is higher. But according to Which magazine, the airline has been hiking the cost of those replacement flights by as much as £80. The consumer group said that when one passenger tried to move their Dublin to Malaga flight to August, they were quoted €137, £128 per passenger. But when he checked the Ryanair website for the price of a new ticket on the same plane, it was just €49. Another passenger trying to move flights from Manchester to Alicante was told the new fare was £99. But again, when they went on Ryanair's website as a new customer, they found the same flight for £52, almost half the price. Earlier this month, the Foreign Office banned all but essential international travel from the UK, but airlines have been making it almost impossible to get a refund after the airline cancelled their flight. All flights to on EU carriers within or into the European Union and all flights leaving from an EU airport are protected by the EU's denied boarding rules, which require refunds or rerouting when flights are cancelled. The problem for consumers is that enforcing these rights is proving very difficult. The airlines push those with cancelled bookings to their website or an app. Refunds are only being processed by customer services, which is now impossible to contact. Which described Wizz Air's stance in charging the passengers to switch flights as the worst example we've seen. Now, I think, Dave, maybe come to you first of all about this story. We've already heard about the banks trying to rip people off in the middle of their worst nightmare. Now we're hearing that airlines are busy trying to rip off passengers who have no other way of getting home.
Yes, yes. Well, I suppose that's what some people would describe as business. That's the way it goes. Perhaps they don't have very many passengers, but equally in a crisis like this, they really need to dig deep and bring their morals up to.
Well, I totally agree with you, Dave. I mean, I remember a business manager years ago telling me there was no sentiment in business, but there seems to be no compassion in it either in this country. The Foreign Office, the Foreign Office seemed to be toothless when it comes to making them do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Chris, this is another one for you. I know this is, you've got so many specialities, Chris. I don't know what to ask you first here, but I know that you have a strong connection with Glasgow Airport through your work there. What's your opinion of Ryanair?
I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. Michael Leary is just the same as Richard Branson, is the same. The guy Tim, whatever his name is, runs Weatherspoon. Yep. They are all corporate moguls who, as my father used to say years ago, money goes to money, and that's just it. The other point that has to be made by the airlines that are doing this. The and some countries, the embassies are actually not open.
Yeah, I heard
They
that.
have been forced to close, and people have great difficulty in getting in touch and getting communication from the embassies. And it then allows companies. I've heard, back in the day, just indulge me for a wee second. If you missed your flight and you had to rebook on another one, you also had the opportunity of going on standby for another flight. So the standby list would mean that if one passenger doesn't turn up, they would automatically offer you the ticket at a reasonable price, so that seat didn't fly alone. Now this is not the case. I'm hearing the passengers out in Delhi who are having to fork out £599 in order to try and get a flight back to Heathrow, and they are in 70 odd in the queue on the standby waiting list.
And of course, the country now in lockdown is going to make that even harder, Chris. Listen,
Yeah. They're talking about 2-3 weeks away before the next flight is, leaving that country. And in Westminster, every MP, and not just the SNP as well, every MP and every party had something to say about the fact that they had a constituent stuck in, whether it was Caracas, whether it was Lima, whether it was...
Yeah. Well, listen, Chris, before we completely leave the subject of transport difficulties, we do have, as a final story this evening, a good news story about transport. And this is that where are we here? Let's find the right bit of this story. Yeah, that CalMac have decided on a fares freeze. The ticket prices have been put on hold to help ferry users during the COVID outbreak. Fares are being temporarily frozen on the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services network to help island residents and businesses during the outbreak of coronavirus, with CalMac currently operating a reduced timetable for essential travel only. The planned fare rise has been postponed to assist businesses and remote communities that rely on the Lifeline services. The Ministry for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, Paul Wheelhouse, said, "Supply chains to and from our island communities are vitally important, so we must continue to support them during this outbreak of coronavirus. And with that in mind, I am freezing the fares on the network until we are through this challenge. This will ensure that businesses and hauliers are not placed under any further financial pressure. It also means that islanders who must travel for work or medical reasons do not face additional costs. It remains the case that people need to avoid all but essential travel by ferry to and from Scotland's remote and island communities. But this fare freeze will help those that have to make the journey at this difficult time." So we close with a small but important news story, which is actually a good news story for a change. That is about all we have time for this evening. I know we have started and finished late this evening. Thank you for sticking with us if you've watched all the way through. I'd also like to thank my two guests this evening, of course, Day Tucker, who's out on her farm at the moment. Thanks, Day, for joining us again. Yeah. Okay, and Chris, thanks to you as well for making yourself available as well. Now, we're actually just going to, I'm just being told we're going to run the show on a little bit longer. So I think let's have a little discussion about how the Scottish Government manages things like public transport and the fare structure on its ferries. Day, I mean, it's fairly obvious, isn't it, that the Scottish Government is always trying to make things a bit easier for passengers, not more difficult or more expensive.
Particularly for the Highlands and Islands and these remote communities. And Paul Wheelhouse has just gone so far to try and really help out in the most practical of ways. And I just hope that all the islanders, and I'm sure they will appreciate this.
Yeah.
The other good news stories, by the way, just to balance it up, in my community, I can't think of a single small shop or retailer that has not gone above and beyond to reach out to the community, offer deliveries, take in orders. We've set up as a community, all our communities around here have set up hubs where individuals are contacted. You know, we all know who the vulnerable people are, and a wee note comes through the door to say that this is me, this is my phone number, we're here to help should you need anything. So that's another good news story.
Well, thanks for that, Day. Chris, I know, as I say, aviation is your big thing normally, but CalMac has suffered from quite a bad sort of set of PR, shall we say, misadventures recently with cancelled contracts and things for new ferries. This looks like Paul Wheelhouse is now trying to make an effort here to make it as easy as possible for those who live on the islands or need to commute back and forwards to do so without having to pay extra money.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, quite clearly something has to be done with the restriction on air travel, which many islanders do heavily rely on. And, you know, obviously it's a welcome move by the Scottish Government. But again, on the consensus of good news stories, some of the viewers will have heard that the smaller Highlands and Islands airports are actually closing down during this crisis. But Loganair have valiantly said that they will keep supplying those airports with cargo freight, which is based on the economies.
And of course, they're keeping all the Lifeline services going, Chris, aren't they?
Services going, yeah, definitely.
I know Loganair are operating a much reduced service, but they're keeping all of the Lifeline services to the islands open.
And again, I think that's admirable when we were talking about rogues in the aviation industry, such as Ryanair and Virgin Atlantic. Yet you've got a small wee company like Loganair who are willing to keep the wheels moving for the sake of the country. You know, that has to be highlighted, and it's got to be lauded as well. There are some good people in the aviation industry.
Well, there are often good people. Yeah, there are often good people come out in crises, Chris, and we don't hear very much about them. I've just been handed a little item of news here. It's actually a shout out, a thank you to Arnold Clark Van Hire in Prestwick. And the message just reads quite simply, you know what you did, and we know what you did, and we're very grateful. So a little bit of a cryptic thank you from somebody to Arnold Clark Van Hire in Prestwick. And I think from the way it's been written and who handed it to me, this has actually come from Broadcasting Scotland. So somebody in Arnold Clark Van Hire in Prestwick, thank you very much indeed for helping Broadcasting Scotland. And as I was going to do earlier on, I was going to wind the show up and just thank my two guests this evening. Day Tucker on her farm up in Stirlingshire. Thank you again, Day, for being with us by Skype tonight. And Chris in Glasgow in your own home. Chris, again, thanks for all your expert input again this evening.
No problem.
And that, as they say, is just about it from Broadcasting Scotland for this week and for me. As usual, if you wish to support Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by contacting us using the details on your screen now at www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register. And of course, if you wish to just simply make a single donation, you can do that too. And we rely on all of our viewers to help us keep making programmes. Anyway, that is it from me for this evening, and I will be back again on Monday evening with another edition of Scotland at 7. Until then, from all of us here at the Scotland at 7 studio and Broadcasting Scotland, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. Good night.